if we are to believe that there is no unofficial ban on Pakistani players participating in the 100, which players should be picked?
Usman Tariq.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Shadab Khan.
Yeah.
So that's two, right?
Harris Ralph.
Harris Ralph's not even in their current side, though.
I
suppose he still plays in the
I would
he's still
have
100-ish, isn't he?
Shaheen Shah.
It depends on how fit he is. But yeah, if he was fully fit, then obviously, the way he was bowling in the Big Bash, you may never want to see him bowl again.
If you go
Nazim
on,
Shah?
if you go on sort of the 63 men, I would say I've got written down somewhere.
The opener, who's the opener they've got at the moment? Who was the leading run scorer in the World Cup? I've forgotten his name, but he's another one.
The captain, Ayub.
Yeah, Ayub is another one. There's probably about what?
7.
I think I had
You want the
7 or
midfield
8.
bowling? Yeah, there's probably about 8.
What a team.
Yeah.
Bring him in, like the old ICL days when they had a Pakistani team, the Lahore Badshahs.
What happens if no Pakistani players are picked?
Pakistani players will be picked. They just won't be picked by the teams that are owned by IPL owners.
Okay. So what happens if that becomes a continual theme?
Well, it was always going to be.
Year after year after year.
It was always going to become a thing. I don't understand why this is an issue now when we knew it was going to happen from the moment that Mohammed Abbas was let go by Hampshire.
Yeah. I think the reason it's become a story now is because of a story that the BBC picked up on. I think there's a difference between, because a lot of things, as we know how it works, a lot of things we know as journalists will become a story.
Yeah.
Right? We understand how the media works. We understand rolling news cycles, the fact that there's a kind of a time and a place for stories like this. And it's been decided that now is the time. So yeah, you're right.
Is that off the back of...
We can all sit back and go, well, we knew this was going to happen, but it is a story, right?
Is that off the back of what happened leading into this the T20 World Cup?
It's
Bangladesh, Pakistan boycotting. All of a sudden, is that highlighting the story?
No.
Even more?
It's because, according to a story in the BBC, on the BBC website, a senior ECB official put to paper, in the form of an email, the notion that unofficially no Pakistani players will be selected by an IPL-owned team.
Well,
so as soon as the
that leaves 4
as soon as the people that run the sport have come out and said that this is happening, that makes it a bigger story. Which is
so
why I'm
I've
talking
worked
about it.
for a couple of IPL ownership groups over the time, and every time I've worked for them, I've been told categorically you cannot hire a Pakistani player. This is just what happens. So the team that I worked with was, I think it was the ownership group of the Punjab Kings, and they owned the Edinburgh Rocks in the European League that never went ahead. And we would, I think me and Ramps were working with that team, Shane Berger, who was the Scotland coach, and that was the message. It was that you can't get it. And I've worked with other teams where they've come in and they've said, can you help us find some players for this draft? And I've offered the players, and there's been Pakistani players on there, and they've said, stop putting Pakistani players on there. We're not going to hire any Pakistani players. So yes, it's a bigger story now because it's been put to paper, but it was naive of the ECB to ever think this wasn't going to happen. And it's the same conversation. You know, Bumble's been sitting in Harmish chair lots of times for these shows, and beforehand he always asked me about what's going to happen when the ownership group took over. And you hear every time, I probably might have even done it on air a couple of times, where I said they are going to do everything they want to do. They're going to rename the teams, they're going to change the colours, they're going to put the people in charge that they want to do, and that includes them not having Pakistani players, right? If the ECB did not know that beforehand, then they're not fit to run cricket. They haven't been paying any attention. And they did know it beforehand. And they just chose to think that they could win them over. You're not winning over billionaires. These billionaires have more power than the ECB.
So when you were put in that position, how did you react to being told that essentially you've got to... what's the word?
I can tell you exactly what I said the first time it happened. I said, if I knew you were doing this and I was working for another team, I would just go about getting all the best Pakistani players into my side, right? And I would have a tactical advantage over you. If you're actually trying to win, this is the stupidest thing possible. But they're not trying to win, right? They're trying to build brands. I should say, not all these ownership groups actually, they're not in a situation where they always believe this themselves. They're doing this because of public perception. I saw there was a LinkedIn post this week going, these brave owners. Then I've talked to some of these owners. Some of these owners have no issues with hiring Pakistani people, right? You know, they're all taking selfies with Wassim Akram every time they get a chance, right? But there is a perception that it will hurt their business interests. It might hurt their relationships with the government. So they're having to do what they have to do. We can be completely anti them as much as we want, but when it comes down to it, this is a much bigger issue than just about cricket, right? It goes a lot deeper than cricket. The issue from cricket perspective is that the ECB thought they could handle this, and they were either being naive or dumb. And you can take your choice on which one of them it was, but they didn't do their due diligence on this one, and now they've been caught out with something that I was told when I talked about Mohammed Abbas, I was told that I was stretching it, and it was complete nonsense, right? And that was 2 years ago when he was let go, and now look where we are. They've had 2 years to prepare for this. Everyone knew this was coming.
Homie, I mean, it's difficult to bring, you know.
Yeah, I mean, from a player's point of view, you've shared a dressing room with, you know, I've shared a dressing room with sort of good Pakistani players, and you don't want to see the politics come into it, but unfortunately, it just seems to be getting more and more. Like we spoke on a couple of other podcasts about the power that India are getting. Where's this game going to go? What we're going to look like in 10 years' time? What's the landscape? You know, I'm with you. I think anybody that thought that ECB or the 100 or the marketing team or the people that were getting the 100 in a position to sell it would go, right, that'll not happen here, is naive or pretty dumb. But I think from that point of view, the inclusive, this competition's for everybody. This is a new audience. This is the 100. That's been rammed down throats like me, who have been skeptical of. The only thing I'm skeptical of is the actual format. Don't mind it playing in August. I don't mind. I'm all for the best playing against the best. Definitely looking for a new audience that comes into cricket. But all of a sudden, we're closing the door in England. If we're England closing the door on somebody else's politics, then I think we've got a big problem.
Also,
I think we've got a big problem.
We're talking about Pakistan now. Mustafizur Rahman was pulled out of the IPL.
Yeah.
So if it's Bangladesh and Pakistan, it becomes a bigger issue. And those are two pretty important cricket populations within the UK.
Yeah.
Okay.
So coming to watch. So all of a sudden,
you're telling the supporters of those, you're telling supporters from those backgrounds that they're not welcome.
Yeah, and you've got half the tournament. So 4 teams, 4 venues. If they're basically saying we're not having Pakistani or Bangladeshi players, we don't want your Bangladeshi or Pakistani supporters, then all of a sudden, if there's an issue there, then I think that's a bigger issue for the ECB when it comes to we set out this tournament. I mean, you're 100% spot on when you talk about Bumble and about changing the names and stuff like that. My worry further down the line is where the Sky fit in all this.
Yeah.
Because they've gone out on a limb, created a tournament, created a brilliant product for everybody in this country to love and around the world. And in 2028, 2029, when the TV deal comes again, I can't imagine these ownership groups going, yeah, we'll give you that as part of the English cricket broadcasting. It's got to be kept separate. So there's going to be an issue there. So like the ownership, if 4 teams have decided they're not having players, supporters from Bangladesh or Pakistan, what sort of message is that driving, and what's that going to be looking like from the top, i.e. Gould and Thompson at the top of ECB? Because at the end of the day, whether they've got invested interest or not, or it's not being handled by them, one's chief executive, one's chairman, they are in charge of English cricket. This is a flagship tournament. This is just created 500 million. This is a massive problem for them.
Can I throw a wrench to you?
Well, I'm just about to throw one back to you guys, but yeah, go for it.
We mentioned 8 players, and none of us mentioned Babar Azam. So the opposite of this is that Cricket Australia just basically used Babar Azam as a PR tool to play for the Sydney Sixers when no one thought he should be playing T20 cricket as an overseas pro at that stage on that level of cricket, right? So a lot of these players are exploited for fan groups, right, already. And county teams are more than happy to do this. We know that county teams are looking for players that will bring them more eyeballs sometimes rather than the best players. So it is a little bit disingenuous to pretend that the 100 is for all when sometimes the 100 is actually about marketing more than it is anything else. And I think if I was on the other side of this, that's what I would be saying. But that's sport now. Cricket at the moment is a $1 billion industry and a geopolitical mess, right? And both of those things are true at the same time, and things are going to bounce around. Anyone who stays on the same side of all these arguments isn't really thinking them through.
What is the difference between this and what happened all those years ago when South Africa wouldn't allow black players to come and play there?
The biggest difference at that stage is that South Africa weren't actually engaging in world cricket or world sport, right? So South Africa didn't play India, they didn't play the West Indies, they didn't play Pakistan. They weren't actually engaging in cricket as a whole. And cricket was still very late to kick them out. Let's not forget. There was the second Women's World Cup was almost scheduled in South Africa. Australia was still going to play them into the 70s at home until essentially a future Australian Prime Minister got involved to do that. The biggest difference between these things is what you have at the moment is geopolitical tensions between these two countries, which goes back years, and we can blame England for, which we will happily do, and I will happily do at any time. But when it comes down to it, that is a geopolitical issue between those two groups. What you had in South Africa was a system where one whole section of the population were not treated as human beings, and the rest of the world said, well, we don't want to be involved. And then South Africa wouldn't play anyone else at that stage. That's very, very different than what you were seeing with what India and Pakistan is happening.
But of course, we're not asking India to do this at home. We're asking India to do this. Well, India are asking for this to be played out overseas as well as at home, which...
Yeah, but it's different because...
I'm not saying that what you said isn't true, by the way, but South Africa would refuse to play certain countries.
Yeah, so they weren't really participating in world sport, right? They were half participating in it, and eventually the racial side of that became too big a thing for all of world sport, right? It wasn't just a cricket thing. Cricket was one of the last sports to be involved in this. Although tennis gets away with it, and it had South Africa in the Davis Cup a little bit longer as well. But cricket was one of the last sports to really get involved with this. This is very different because this is actually, it's not even the Indian government. There are people who have Indian citizenship who own cricket teams around the world who still have Pakistani players playing for them, right? It's certain owners who are famous, like Mustafizur Rahman. There have been tensions between Bangladesh and India for a long period of time. Mustafizur Rahman was going to play in his 5th or 6th IPL team in his 8th or 9th season, and he was pulled out. And it's because it was made a big deal by a former politician, and then Messenger and everything else swept up, and there were other politicians involved. So sometimes it's a local news story that suddenly gets big that makes these things into something, right? It wasn't that long ago. I mean, when the IPL started, there were Pakistani players playing in the IPL. There are still Pakistani people commentating on the ICC. So it's not like it's a complete blanket rule, which is also part of the issue here at this point. And when a Pakistani player is playing in the 100, they're not actually representing Pakistan. Right? So it's separate again. So it's okay for them to represent Pakistan and play in a tournament where India interests are making money, but it's not okay for them to do it this way. So it doesn't even completely follow logic.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's one of the bigger issues with this. And also the other thing I would say is, having dealt with this for a long time, it's not surprising to me that the first person to write this down anywhere was an English person or someone to do with ECB and not someone to do with Indian cricket. Because when Mustafizur went down, I haven't seen an official thing from the BCCI saying that Mustafizur Rahman could not play in the IPL. He was just taken out. And when Pakistani players first stopped playing in the IPL, Lalit Modi, who was running it at the time, said there were no Pakistani players good enough to play in the IPL. While Sohail Tanvir had been a star a couple of years earlier, and they had a couple of other key players. So this is my point of what we are talking about here is local politics. We're talking about, populist government positions. We're talking about billionaires who are worried about their relationships with people. With the ECB, they're worried about marketing and their local markets. This is not cricket issues. right? And when sometimes I'll talk about this stuff and people will be like, stick to cricket. And I was like, unfortunately, this is cricket now.
Yeah.
Talking about a billionaire and their relationship with the government, and that's why they might not have a Pakistani player on their franchise, is actually where we have ended up in cricket at the moment. And it was probably one way or another, I think cricket's been lucky to actually have as long a political, I wouldn't say a great run, but a good run. In that I'm surprised that politics hasn't derailed cricket more often when you think about the fact that these countries are all incestuous. Because it all comes from the Commonwealth and how the Commonwealth has played out.
Afghanistani women would probably raise their hands.
No, but you've got Kenya and Zimbabwe. Like we've had little flaps, right? Afghanistani women is a perfect example of that. But look at Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa, right? They were all kind of one place. They were playing all domestic cricket at one stage together and all these sorts of things. And now they're 3 individual teams separate to each other. Cricket is so unlike almost any other culture when it comes to this, right? The West Indies, even Ireland, right? Ireland is Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. So my point being is that you have situations where Grenada was part of the West Indies. The rest of the West Indies were involved in the US forces invading Grenada, while Grenada was still technically providing cricketers for the West Indies. We are a complete geopolitical
mess.